Well, thank you so much for being here. This is so exciting. I know this is your first time on a podcast, so I'm honored.
Thank you for having me.
And we were just talking off mic. You came into my life because of a mom group that we're both in, and I've talked a little bit in other conversations just how transitioning into motherhood, which is like a big conversation among women, professional women like us, and our own fears and insecurities around that. And I'd love to hear that from your perspective. But one thing that I have a 6-month-old, and your son's like what?
My son is 7.
7. Okay, so you're further along, but
Yes.
there was this fear jumping into this new identity and redefining ourselves as women, as working women. But I could never have predicted how expansive becoming a mother was going to be, and how many incredible women were going to come into my life as a result of this choice. And getting to meet people like you, and just again everyone that I've gotten to sort of be in community with as a result of becoming a mom, women who are kicking ass and taking names and doing the thing, you know what I mean, who are juggling both, and within our industry, which is very specific. It's just so inspiring, and I feel so embraced by the community that we're a part of. And so it's extra special to have you on as a producer, exec, but also as a fellow mom, and both of our sons are named Theo, so it's like, oh my God, it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you
for having a baby.
And I agree, by the way, I've had the same experience.
Yeah.
And being a mom has kind of been tied to my experience with the substance, because the first time I met Coralie, I was very pregnant, and she remembers that, that I was really pregnant. And then my son was 4 when we made the film and came to Paris and all this stuff. So he's been there. He's been on many Zooms, many phone calls, very, very aware of the substance, even though of course he hasn't seen it. Yeah.
Does he understand on some level? I mean, he's obviously still very young, what the film is about, having been so sort of around it, or has he asked questions?
No, I've let him watch the trailer because he was over my shoulder when I was watching a lot of cuts of it. And finally I was like, okay, just watch it. I give up. You can watch it. It's very scary, but you can watch it. And that's as far as he's gotten, and he has no interest in seeing the film after that.
Why? Because he was scared, did it?
It just was not for him.
Yeah. Not the key demo. Got it. Well, I'd love to take us to the beginning, because I'm delighted that this is your first sort of time sharing a bit of your story and your journey with me and everyone listening. I'm so like on this mission of documenting as many of our stories as we can to help others navigate their own careers and their own journeys as women and people in the industry. So take us to the beginning of how you sort of fell into this, or found this, or however you got there.
The very beginning is probably that my dad is a film distributor in Canada. So I grew up in Montreal, but very much around the business side of things. So he used to take me out to movie theaters on Friday nights to collect the grosses and like watch the lineups for films. And he was so giddy about it. Like, he just loved what he did so much that I kind of felt like I would never do anything else. So it was more about finding my own place in that industry. And I moved to New York for grad school, studied cinema studies there, and started my career in New York. So I was at New Line, like the old big New Line.
Yeah, wow.
Watched that collapse, and Bob Shea and Michael Lynn got a production deal out of that, and that they were the first people who hired me as an exec. But I said, like, I want to be out in LA. So I moved out here in 2008. And
good year to come out here.
Yeah, exactly. It was perfect. And I worked my way up at a lot of different production companies since then, eventually making my way to, I worked with Lorenzo de Bonaventura. That's where I first met Coralie, I guess 8 years ago now. And then I was at Working Title when I made this movie.
Yeah. And so then to just back up a little bit, when you went to New York, did you already sort of understand, I guess, the mechanisms of the business and where you wanted to get in, or was it like an internship that kind of sort of gave you perspective into all the different career paths?
I had probably more of an understanding than most of distribution and of the business side of things. I first went to grad school thinking I wanted to be a film critic, so that was like where I was heading.
And why was that? Because because you loved?
Because I thought that was just an interesting way. I don't know, to be honest. Like it sounded like a way to get to do what I loved, which was to watch movies. But at that time, I didn't actually have any sense of how they were made. So I didn't know at all what a producer was or what they did. It just felt like a way I could be part of a conversation, watch a ton of stuff, and I don't know, it sounded fun. But then as soon as I started taking classes and actually trying my hand at it,
Yeah.
I found that, like, I took a film criticism class, and the first review that I tried to write, I did it variety style, where I was like predicting the box office of the movie and not actually focusing on the review that much. And anyway, very quickly realized I didn't want to do that. And my first job, actually my very first job, was at the old Miramax, the Harvey Miramax. I was just there for a year, and it was not fun, but
Yeah.
I was in acquisitions there, and I worked for a woman named Agnes Mentre, and that's where I kind of came across, like, okay, this is what acquisitions is. I started to understand what development was, what studio execs do versus producers. And when I went to New Line, I fully worked in development there, and that's where I was like much more exposed to, as a studio, you're a buyer, it's incoming, you're reacting to what's incoming. If you're a producer, like, you're a seller, you've got to put the projects together. And, you know, that at first I thought being a buyer sounded way more fun, but then when I actually, I guess, kind of fell into producing, because that first job, the first exec job I got was at a production company, I sort of fell into having to create projects that people bought. It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
And I realized that pretty quickly, but I also loved it, and then never strayed from that. I never went back to working at a studio again.
Yeah. What would you say, I guess, is the biggest difference then between how you would define the work of a studio executive or an executive at any level versus a producer?
Well, first of all, studio execs, because they're buyers, they're constantly responding to the material that's coming into them. They're looking at things that are much, much more fully formed, typically. I mean, they'll obviously buy books as well, but so much of what they evaluate, a lot of thought has gone into how something might be a movie. So it'll come in a script form, or it'll come in, you know, much more
Packaged,
thought through,
yeah.
packaged. And then, I mean, they're overseeing a really big slate of projects. They're kind of overseeing, for the most part, on a more macro level, although it completely depends on the movie and the studio exec. But I feel like as a producer, you know, you're just in every single little detail of the project from the inception all the way to the release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because, you know, there's been a big trend, dare I say it, of the producer title, right? The producer sort of, what is a producer? This is a question that is explored all the time, especially on this show and many other lanes where there's, you know, Dear Producer and Producers United and the Producers Union. There's all these other places where people are sort of starting to demystify, like, and really start to not materialize, but redefine producers, because it's so convoluted for so many people, and in an age where sometimes producer credits are given, but also equally frustrated that our industry doesn't really create space when we're starting out for everyone to sort of understand the process. So whatever lane you're going to occupy, it's like, what other field do you just get to ascend without understanding how certain parts of it really function? And I wish there was like a mandate where if you're going to work at an agency, for you to get promoted to a desk, you have to have X amount of production hours, you know, where you've been on set, you've been in that production office, and you know that if you take 24 hours to get back to the coordinator who's trying to logistically do stuff with the AD for your talent, because like the domino effect that has on so many things, because you've lived it, it just would create a more well-rounded, compassionate industry, there I say it, which is maybe a pie in the sky desire, but
no, it's true.
You know.
But even with development, you know, like, none of us go to school for development. Not really. I mean, you could maybe study screenwriting or certain things that are helpful, but for the most part, when you go work at a production company and you start reading scripts and evaluating them, there's no training for that. You know, the training is just doing it.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, figuring it out, working through your taste, you know. Like, when I hear very, very new executives say, like, I'm great at development, it's like, it takes time to become really great at development. It's only after you've done a lot of development that you're good at development. And
what is it that makes someone go from good to great?
I think part of it is just, like, putting in the time and the work, you know, the 10,000 hours, that type of thing. And then, of course, I think some of it is just having, like, amazing story understanding. I think knowing how to talk to writers and directors, having great story sense, like, a lot. But all of that you just learn by doing.
Yeah.
At least that was my experience. Like, even though I went to grad school, I never learned any of that.
Yeah. And so then take me to Substance. So you meet Coralie when you're very pregnant, as we were talking about, like
yes.
4 years before you ever get on set, right? For Substance?
Yes.
So that was the first time the Substance came around, or was it just when you guys initially met? Take us through the genesis of like.
So I had watched her first movie, Revenge, and I had really loved it. And Coralie came to LA and did, the couch and water bottle tour, as people call it. She did a big round of meetings, and I met her at that time. That's when I was pregnant, and gushed over the movie and, told her how much I wanted to work with her. And, it's always one of those things when there's a director that you want to work with, sometimes they're open to hearing ideas, or, maybe you can find a book for them, or maybe there's a script you might be finding for them, or they're generating their own stuff. And with Coralie, like, she just made it clear. She was like, wanted to write her own thing. She had just had an idea. She didn't tell us what it was, but she said, like, I have my next idea and I'm going to go write it. And when it's ready, I'm going to share it with you. So that took her a long time, because she has now I know, I didn't know at the time, she has a very specific writing process. She pretty much makes the entire movie in her head, and her scripts are incredibly detailed. So every single thing, the way she's planning on shooting something, like, it's incredibly detailed. And by the way, the script is online now, so I would urge anybody who is interested in that movie and really in filmmaking, like, to go look at her script, because it's all the things that writers are told not to do. She broke every rule in terms of the amount of detail, but I think because she was directing it, it was okay.
Yeah.
But it was like a real blueprint. But anyway, she just said, like, I'm gonna go away and write, and when I have something, I'll share it. And then I guess it was 2 or so years later, at the start of the pandemic, it was like September 2020. This script arrived with an 80-page lookbook, and
wow.
The script was like 145 pages or something, and it was incredible. And then, we did the Zoom thing because it was still very much COVID days, and the Zooms were all great, but Coralie was like, we have to get in a room together, like, I need to sit with you guys, like, it has to be a looking each other in the eyes before, like, we really commit exactly to doing this. So she came from Paris to London, and I went from LA to London on the very first flight that BA opened up to passengers. And we had this great meeting at Working Title in London, and spent a whole afternoon, understanding what we were all getting into together.
And from that meeting on, was it clear what it was, or did it sort of take you, because the film obviously takes you on a wild ride, was the creative process and how it unfolded from your perspective similar to that?
I think it was helpful that the script was so detailed.
Yeah.
The lookbook, it's funny because I went back and looked at it again after we finished the film, and, like, it's exactly like the movie. She just had such a clear idea of what it was that she wanted to make. So it was, for me, kind of a different way of working with a director, because in my previous experiences, I was way more creatively involved. Like, we were talking before about the idea of a creative producer, and Coralie was interested in so many creative conversations, but at the same time, like, she wasn't really looking for notes on the script. I think in her, like, she kind of knew what she wanted to do, and she wanted the help to bring that vision to life, but it was much less of a, let's give you a bunch of notes and rewrite the script, and now you're going to do a draft for this, and how about you, none of that. So it became much more of a conversation of, like, okay, how are we going to make this?
Yeah. And so then from there, September 2020, so then just trying to think through timeline. So then you said 2 years later?
We started shooting in spring of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was the journey to getting the green light, getting Demi more attached, all of that, talk us through that a little bit.
Sure. So we did a budget for the film. So that was the first thing, just to be able to take it out to market, knowing exactly what we needed. And So it was around 18 million.
Was it the plan to do it in LA? Did you guys
No.
want that? No, never.
No, never, because we knew we could never afford
Yeah.
to do it in LA. No. And Coralie did come to LA. It was pretty early on. I think we were still casting at that point, but she came out here and like we visited a bunch of locations. It wasn't technically a scouting trip, but we sort of,
Yeah.
you know, it was a little bit of that. But the plan pretty early was to shoot it in France because I think she knew that that's where she'd be able to make the movie the way she wanted to make it. They have an amazing tax credit there, so it was like a 40% tax rebate. Yeah. And she knew that she wanted to have a lot of days. It ended up being 108 days.
Wow.
Yes. It
Why
was
so many
not
days?
going to be that many originally. Well, the last 30 or so days of the shoot was what she called a lab unit. So that was a tiny, tiny crew, like 8 people, no actors, and it was all of the close-ups and inserts in the movie. So it was, you know, and some of the effects, but basically like she wanted the freedom to be able to spend as much time as she wanted shooting like a bowl of shrimp, you know, like those close-ups, all those things for her are so important. If you see Revenge, she used a similar technique there, and I think she just knew that she wanted to be able to have the time to do that. And then with the shoot, I mean, a lot of things were very, very technically complicated.
Yeah.
And like with the theater, we had to build that set, and we, you know, it was just things that were going to be extremely time consuming and very precise. So, and then with prosthetics, like that really cuts into how much you can shoot every day, because Demi was in prosthetics like sometimes 7 hours a day.
Oh my gosh.
And suddenly like you have 2 hours to shoot with her. So you're suddenly doing very little with her that day.
So how many, I guess, with page count, is that even a thing of how many you guys were averaging per day? Probably not, because it seems to be just,
no.
Yeah.
No, none of those rules really
Applied.
were applying. No. But so we did a budget, and you know, we kind of made our actress wish list, and working title has a first look deal at Universal, so we took it there first. And they were very intrigued. They had really liked Revenge. They had been wanting to work with Coralie. They weren't sure about the movie, so they kind of did that thing of like, why don't you go see if someone else wants to make the movie, and if not, come back to us and let's talk about it again. So, you know, the gentle pass. And so we did that. We went and like, you know, sent the script everywhere, the lookbook. We didn't have an actress attached at the time, but we had the budget. And we had meetings with all the places that were interested. There were 1 or 2 studios, and then kind of the, you know, Neon, A24, those kinds of places. So we had a lot of conversations. We got offers in, but they weren't as much as we needed to make the movie the way she knew she wanted to make it. So, yeah, it would have been a question of really compromising, which I'm sure she would have figured out how to do if she had no choice, or going back to Universal and kind of saying, well, maybe you can see a way where this fits your mandate. And, you know, there's such a long history between working title and Universal. And I also think, like, they could see some value in a very original film. You know, they had made Get Out, and they made a deal with the Daniels.
Right.
Like, there's a real argument for originality translating to box office, even though you're taking a huge roll of the dice with that.
But isn't everything? I feel like this industry.
This one's a big roll of the dice.
It is a big roll, but yeah, I think it's like it's such a risk-averse industry when everything is risk. To your point earlier, you have people who come in off, you know, from the jump who don't even know the job, and it takes you 10,000 hours to really understand truly how to be good to great at the thing, whether it's on set or behind a desk, whatever. And that is so risky. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot when I've come up and been handed millions of dollars to oversee, and it's like, no one's checked my credentials, no one's checked anything, you know. It's like this trust, and it's like so much risk when you consider and compare it to other industries and how they function. Yet there's always this perception of like, well, we gotta first look at the data and the stats of how this performed and what can this be. And again, it's just all trying to, I think it's like mitigating the narrative around risk, but all of it is risk to an extent, unless you're doing, you know, the 18th Transformer. But even the first one could be perceived as a risk depending on the budgetary risk. We're taking a risk on that specific actor or a director that's given their shot to go make the big studio movie, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just wild to me. Bothers me.
No, it is. And like, I feel like I was trying to make the argument that this was a very calculated risk. You know, for me, we had all loved Revenge, so there was like a movie we could point to that, you know, showed us what her ability was. I felt like I could really see the trailer for the movie off of the script. Like, I felt like I knew it was going to be visually stunning, and I really did feel like it was going to be a marketer's dream. Like, it has such a simple premise that I felt like that would, like, I could see the path in that direction. You know, you knew that the roles for the actresses, especially the role that Demi ended up playing, was going to be one that, like, if it turned out well, which thankfully it did, was going to be like something that got a lot of attention for somebody. So I could see a lot of different ways to sell the film, and plus it was going to be so original. Like, there was no way people weren't going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the hardest thing, because originality has proven to work at the box office, but obviously it doesn't always.
Right. And so was it easy to get Demi on board from the jump?
It was really interesting because we started casting the more traditional way of like, okay, let's try to make a submission to somebody, and then you wait like sometimes 3-4 months to get a pass. It was going very, very slowly, and that was very frustrating. That's just the process, but you know, it was hard.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, we decided to not be so guarded with the script. We were initially sending it like under lock and key with Ember Shot, like nobody else could read it. And at a certain point we said, you know what, like, let's just be a little loose with the script, let agents read it, let them pass it around if they want to, and see if we start getting incoming. And that's exactly what happened. There were actresses who started reading it on their own, and we started getting calls saying like, will Coralie meet with so-and-so? And I got a call, it was before Demi had read the script, but it was from one of her agents saying, you know, if Demi reads the script, will Coralie meet with her? And like, obviously
yes.
the answer to that is yes. But I think all of us felt like Demi had not really been on our lists because we had never imagined that she would say yes. And yeah, it was just kind of, it felt very serendipitous, because as soon as I heard the name, as soon as Coralie heard the name, like, it kind of was like, it has to be her. Yeah, it's perfect. But then we all thought like, well, is she really going to want to do it? And then, yeah, she read it and she was interested like very, very early on, and then had like, I think 5 meetings with Coralie, because Coralie's very thorough. So, and I think Coralie really wanted to make sure that Demi understood like what the filmmaking process was going to be like, how long it was going to be, how she likes to work, how she likes to shoot, all of that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Demi was game.
And certainly, you know, without spoiling anything, obviously it's a very revealing role for her.
Yes.
And to go there as any woman and put your body on display in the way that her and Margaret do, like, you know, I don't know how many of those conversations needed to be had on the front end to make sure that like Coralie was approaching it with the female gaze and the utmost respect and all of that. And I know some of the criticism that people have about the film is sort of like the hypersexualized thing, which a lot of men do anyway. And I think it's a commentary on that, if that's my perspective. Exactly. And if you didn't get it, you're sort of missing the point. But fine. But yeah, but I just wonder like if there was resistance on the front end, because it is such a pivotal part of this story and this idea of being, you know, in your sort of rawest form as a woman of any age. And so I just wonder like how the conversations went around that with both actresses, really.
There wasn't resistance. Like, I think both of them, again, as I mentioned before, like the script had a level of detail I've never seen in a script before or since.
Yeah.
And it really laid out exactly what was going to be asked of them. And then Coralie had many, 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 many conversations before casting either one of them, where she then explained all of that again in detail.
Yeah.
And explained, explaining to Margaret the kind of male gaze way she was planning on filming her, and a lot of that stuff. There was also a decision that was made pretty early with Margaret to use prosthetics for her breasts. So in an interesting way, I don't think Margaret felt as naked because she wasn't really.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I didn't know that she used prosthetics.
Oh, yes.
Good for her.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of love that she did because she's playing a female ideal that doesn't even exist. And that, for me, feels perfect.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that it wasn't even
her body.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I think in this age of like beauty standards, it's always a fascinating topic for me personally, and thinking about young kids, girls, especially growing up in the age of social media, and how like you can now put a filter on your face and be a completely different person, and your body can be changed instantly, and these different beauty ideals that it's giving younger girls, and these aspirations of like looking a certain way that is literally impossible. Like no human looks like that.
Yeah.
And I love the commentary, what I took away, the commentary that this film has on that quest for that insatiable, it's an addiction,
Yeah. Well, it was interesting too, because the first time Coralie and Demi met, Demi brought up her book that she had written, and she gave her the book to read, and I read the book as well. And I mean, her book talks so much about the scrutiny around her body, both externally and her own internal struggle with her own weight. So it was, it just felt very serendipitous that like a lot of the things that the film talks about, I guess it's not serendipitous, it's meant the female experience.
Well, and it's meant to be. I think that my belief is that when things just organically, because every movie is such a miracle, as we know, and anything can go wrong at any step of the process, but when things seem to just come together in this way that's so synergistic, it does feel ordained. I don't know,
Yeah.
And when you get to have that imprint in what you're making, and then audiences respond to something on a visceral level, that like for Demi to be able to speak to that through her performance because of the life she's lived is completely different than what any other actress would bring to the table. But one could say that that is obviously a huge part of what has made the alchemy of that film work for so many people, And so I'm a strong believer that when these things just naturally find their way, it's like meant to be, and I don't know. So I believe that like with a different actor, not to say the film wouldn't be good, it just would be a completely different film, a completely different experience that we would be taking on. And I think as someone who grew up with Demi as that like sort of bastion of beauty, and what that means, which is such a great thing to be known for being so beautiful, but then how do you hold on to that value that others have placed on you as a part of your identity as a human, who's navigating a very public image, I guess, that you have to have. So knowing that about her, and that she's obviously bringing some level of that to the role, is it's just the meta-ness of it all, I think, is what just makes it so much more fascinating, I think, to me.
I completely agree. And I think we were all thrilled that she was so ready to dive into the role, and not just like make the film, but be ready for the conversation that was going to surround the film, which was going to be digging up everything about her history, her own journey in Hollywood, her relationship to her body, her people scrutinizing her body, just all of it. She was welcoming that conversation, and I'm so thrilled that she did, because I can't imagine the movie with anybody else.
I hope it's closed the loop for her on some type of healing journey that she's been on, to be a part of this process and now get to talk about it from this place. I hope, because
I can't really speak to that, but I feel like she's so proud of the film and seems to be enjoying this journey. And I think for all of us involved in the movie, the way people have responded to it, to like see it enter popular culture in this way, like you kind of hope that might happen when you set out on a movie like this, but then when it actually does happen times 10, it's like pretty incredible.
Yeah. So we talk about risk. We were talking about risk at the beginning. How do you assess whether a risk is worth taking?
I mean, for me, so much of it has to do with what the filmmaker's done before, or I guess I should say it's about the filmmaker, because that is where everything starts. But yeah, depending on what the track record is that's already there, like that gives me a lot of confidence. If it's someone's first film, then it's like a little bit of a different calculation, but it's always based on, what they've done before. And my journey as a producer, I've always worked in the studio system. So I've worked only at production companies that have had, honestly, big deals at studios. So, I'm not like in the indie gritty, like that just isn't my experience. So I've worked with very few first-time directors.
Yeah.
Hardly any, really.
Yeah.
So already the risk is mitigated from that point of view, but you're always trying to look at the quality of something and have the right cast, just all of those things.
Yeah. Do you think that with the shifts that have been happening and the contraction of the market and a lot of roles, leaving and companies shutting down, there's not enough exec jobs, to your point, to sustain the workforce that we have? Do you feel like you would ever want to dip your toe into that independent producer pond?
It feels like a bad time to go and try and do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I feel like we're all looking for as much creative freedom as possible. So it's kind of trying to find that place. I feel like normally the smaller the budget, the more creative freedom you have. So there is something really great in trying to work at a lower budget if you can.
What does low budget mean to you? Because coming from the studio world, I've learned that means different things.
For me, it would mean like a $3 to $5 million movie. I don't know how to make one of those, but I would love the challenge of that.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure. I mean, but I look at a movie like The Brutalist, and they made that for under 10. Like, that blows my mind. But it's incredible, and the movie's incredible. Like, it's epic, and the scale is there, and they figured out how to do it. Or Anora was $6 million. Like, people are figuring out how to do it. So I would welcome the challenge. Yeah,
it is a worthwhile challenge. I think what I feel bummed about is that, unfortunately, the price point challenge means production leaving LA. To your point, like, even at 18 million, you go, can't shoot that in LA, which to folks like me who've come up more on the indie side, you hear that and you go, that's crazy. But that's the truth. When you really add everything and compound everything and all the minimums and all the things, it just becomes cost prohibitive. And so, you
can't do 108 days in LA for 18 million.
For 18 million, exactly. But even there's other films I know, like friends who, projects that have all the desire in the world to stay in LA, and when they really budget it out, they're like, we just can't do it in this way here. Like, you can if you lose this or lose that, and then you have to make all these concessions before you even get to play ball, right? So then it's like, where internationally do we take it? Like, where does the dollar go further? And it's, again, when you're thinking about the business of making films, mitigating risk, like, you have to think about that. But it is a disadvantage when we see what our industry here in LA, what our unions experienced last year with the double strikes and the amount of jobs that are leaving. And it's like a win for union members getting to have, better pay, of course. But the downside to that is, but there's still a cost to making things and selling those things, depending on what it is, that makes shooting here and hiring those same people that deserve to work at home, it just becomes cost prohibitive, and you have to go figure out how to make it in Bulgaria, and be away from family and all the things. So, so it's interesting. Before we move away from substance, who do you think is more monstrous, if you had to say? Is it Elizabeth or Sue?
I mean, I definitely think it's Sue.
Why?
I mean, first of all, they are one. So
yes.
That's really where I should have started, because there is no Elizabeth and Sue. They're the same person. But, I think what's so interesting to me about Sue is that she could have done anything, but she ends up doing exactly the same thing that Elizabeth did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm too close to it, and I also have gotten to know Margaret, and I know how awful she thought Sue was. With Elizabeth, I have so much empathy for her, and with Sue, it's not there.
Yeah, it's interesting too to think about how, as women, like, there comes a point when we age, especially if you decide to age gracefully, where you start to become invisible to the male gaze, or to the whatever gaze you want to attract in terms of like your sexuality or attractiveness, and I know that can be very hard as well for a lot of women, regardless of like where you are on the spectrum of your beauty, just to feel like you're not getting hit on like you used to, or all of that. I don't know if you've read All Fours. I know that's like a whole thing in Booktown, but really, it really struck a chord with me, and I think there's so many shades of that reckoning that both of those characters go through in their own ways, you know, obviously just very different people in these stories, but the idea of like having that she talks about so much, Miranda July and All Fours, of like then starting to navigate life where you become invisible and you are not an object of desire anymore, and how as women we like want to be like, I don't want this attention, but then you get to a point where it's like you start to lose touch with that, and now you want to like reclaim that for yourself in a way that, I don't know, for some is maybe not in line with your actual age. I don't know.
I mean, I found it really interesting that Coralie said that she started writing or started thinking about the substance right after she turned 40. And, you know, and she wrote the script in her 40s. She's still in her 40s now. She's approaching 50. It's just fascinating to me because I think of 40 as so young still.
Yeah.
And women at 40 are still so, they're gorgeous,
Yeah.
you know, and very vibrant and at their sexual peak and, you know, all of those things. But at the same time, no matter who you are, like no matter how natural you might be, whether you've had work done, you've never had work done, there is no woman who has spent her life, especially by age 40, without thinking about her looks or torturing herself a little bit in some way. Like, I don't know anyone who's completely immune to that. And I think that's why, for me, this script resonated so much. Yeah. And, you know, when I first received it, I think I was 40 or 41. So it, like, so much of it,
hit you, yeah.
It hit me, even though it's about someone who is a little bit older than me, you know, it's still, like, I completely understood why Coralie started thinking about those things at that age. And she was thinking about how she had spent her whole life thinking about her looks, how she was being perceived by men, thinking about, you know, am I skinny enough? Am I too fat? Am I this? Am I that? You know?
Yeah. Oh, I do know.
Quieting those voices.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard for every single one of us.
I don't know if you ever arrived to a place where those voices are completely subdued, though. Perhaps
I think that's where, like, Demi it's been really interesting to listen to her speak, because she definitely talks about being a lot more at peace with herself, and I feel like the older I get, the more at peace with myself I am. Yeah. But, you know, now I'm 45, which is the age of the protagonist in Miranda July's book, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm in for a whole other journey now.
Yeah, it's like it never stops, you know, it's crazy. Talking a little bit about the challenges of this industry, because one of the things on the show, I never really like to shy away about how hard it is, and obviously right now the substance is having a huge moment. It's you know, gotten a bunch of nominations. Hopefully it goes all the way to the Oscars. Oh my God, that would be so exciting.
Be crazy.
Like, it could be crazy, but why not? Crazier things have happened. But, you know, it's like these moments are fleeting, and they're a small percentage of the whole that it takes to get there and have those celebratory, external celebrations, right, of your work. So talk us through, like, periods of your career where you've been in downswings, where things haven't been happening, where you've maybe questioned, should you even be doing this anymore? How have you navigated some of the real lulls that, you know, that you can feel in this industry, in this career path?
Well, so as I've mentioned, I've always been at production companies. So, you know, I had the kind of safety of, like, the overhead deal, the salary. You know, I really felt at the start of COVID, and especially during the 2 strikes last year, like, how fortunate I was to be employed and to have a salary coming in, whether I was able to, like, go into production or not. And, like, so fortunate to be able to kind of weather those storms. I felt like the strikes last year were, like, the hardest period in my career ever. It was absolutely miserable. And, like, it was so hard to be grounded to that extent, because at least during COVID, like, obviously production halted, so much of the world came to a halt, but at the same time, you know, so much focus on development at that time. You could meet anybody, you know, once we figured out how to work Zoom, like, you could meet any director, anything that any of us were watching on TV. It was like, I'm going to talk to that writer, that actor, that director, like, everyone was available, you know?
Yeah.
And there was kind of a beauty in that too. Yeah. With the strikes, it was just like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do with ourselves? I remember sitting there going, like, can I come up with an idea for something? Or, you know, and I can't, because I'm not a screenwriter. So yeah, that felt really, really devastating. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting moment in my career right now. I left working title this summer. So right now I am not working anywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about next steps. And it's a weird time in our
Yeah.
business. So, I've had a lot of conversations with people about like launching my own company and what that might look like and who's paying the bills. Because, like you said, as a producer, when you don't have the overhead from a studio or from, whoever it is paying your overhead, there is no overhead. Like you're not getting paid until something gets made. So,
That's right.
Yeah, it is a very, very hard job.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But what is it that you love about it then? What keeps you here, keeps you grounded? I mean, obviously coming off, like you said, the most challenging portion of your career with the strikes, and now being in this in between and heading into a year where there's not a ton of opportunity right now for many of us, and you're just a lot of women, a lot of moms too, are like, oh, where do I go from here? And I know a lot of moms who've been like, women just in general, who are like trying to find other things they could potentially do, because some people aren't convinced that the industry is going to bounce back to the levels that it did, and are disheartened by all of the catastrophic changes that have happened. And some people are here to ride it out, but like, where do you fit in all of that?
I might be naive, but I feel pretty optimistic about the industry bouncing back, because I feel like in the history of the film industry, there have been changes that have disrupted what the business is, highs and lows. Like I truly believe in my heart of hearts that people are going to keep going to the movies. Like I just do. And so from that point of view, like I'm not shying away from staying in the business. I'm interested in learning television, because I just have never done that.
Yeah.
And, I would love to learn how to produce for TV as well. But aside from that, I mean, I feel like, look at what just happened at the box office this past weekend.
I know.
It was a record weekend. 3 huge blockbusters were in theaters at the same time, and all of them worked. Like people went to see all 3 of them.
Yeah.
And that just reassures me.
Yeah.
It just does. And
I'm like you. I believe still very much in the power of story in cinema, no matter how much. I'm not discrediting that there is short form content and TikTok and these other things. I just think it's all going to exist within the world of story. There'll always be long format stories and narrative films that are an immersive experience, and then the thing you watch on Netflix half-ass while you're scrolling your Instagram. Like, I just think that is sort of where we're heading towards, have been in actually. But I still believe in the power of cinema to capture young audiences and younger minds, to be moved and to be able to continue this art form. But it's like, it's such a volatile industry that's always changing, and I find that the people that are able to like keep up with that and find that these periods of down are actually filled with opportunity. But there's another boom that comes right after that. It's like the Dark Ages and the Renaissance. The Dark Ages, like this feels like Hollywood since the beginning of Hollywood, when radio first came in. Like there's just so many big changes that people said, well, how do we ever tell stories like this with this technology now? And we figure out a way, So similarly, I think there's a lot of cynicism, excuse me, especially with folks that are more day to day on the business side of things and looking at the numbers and the mergers and all of that. But it's like Hollywood is going to Hollywood,
Yes.
And I feel like that doesn't impact story to me. I don't think Hollywood has like the overall, it's not the overall be all on stories, and we can find other ways to tell our stories if that it doesn't make sense for that piece of the machine.
Yeah, I kind of refuse to give in to the cynicism. I just don't even believe it. Like, genuinely. I feel like there's always been disruptions in this industry, and like film has prevailed, and it's continued, and I just feel like that's what's going to keep happening. And as I said, like I don't know as much about the ins and outs of the indie film industry, but I feel like people are still finding ways to make Anora and The Brutalist and A Different Man, and so many movies that have come out this year that are so great.
Yeah.
And were made for a price. And, in a lot of cases, like, new talent is able to emerge. You see people like Helena Rain making this movie with Nicole Kidman. Like, how exciting is that combo? Like, I don't know. I'm excited about so many movies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I want to transition a little bit to motherhood, because you had a really beautiful Instagram post about Substance, and how you said that the film changed your life. I'm curious to know in what ways it changed your life. And every film is like blood, sweat, tears, but an example of how that manifested for you.
I mean, every film is blood, sweat, and tears, but there were more. There was more of everything on this one. I think the length of the shoot and just the ambition of this movie was so massive. The shoot was in Paris, and I ended up going there for 4.5 months. So,
Did your son come with you?
He came only for 1 month.
Okay. That must have been really hard.
Yeah, it was really hard.
Yeah.
I came home every 4 weeks so I could see him. But I was still going 4 weeks at a time without seeing him. And, it was really hard for me and really, really hard for him. And truthfully, when he came to Paris, that was even harder in a way because I was trying to do my job while also
juggle both. Yeah.
Yes, being a mother, and that was where I had that feeling of kind of failing at both things. And there were days where I would have to leave to go to set, and he just refused to let me leave. So in the end, I gave up, and I would let him just come in the taxi with me to the studio, and I just brought him to work, and that was my compromise, and he basically stayed a few hours and then got bored and agreed to go home. But, for a few hours, I couldn't be inside the actual studio. I was outside playing soccer with him and thinking what's the crew thinking right now? But at the same time, I think a lot of people are parents and they get it.
And they get it. Yeah. And I think it's great that you get to model that for others that are younger looking to you and the people in power of how do you do this? How do you juggle this? I mean, I certainly had that thought, and before becoming a mom, I have a 6-month-old, just how do any of us do this? Because it just hasn't been as modeled, and part of what I have loved about being a part of the group is how embraced I've been, and having so many women who are either at the beginning or further along or wherever they are in their journeys of motherhood, and those examples are so important. And so for me now, when I'm on set, it's like, if I have to pump, I'm going to bring my little breast milk and the PO. And I want people to see that because I want to normalize it. And I want them to feel she's getting to do this, then maybe I can do it too. And if it's important to them, it's, having a family isn't important to everybody, especially for women. I want them to feel empowered to start that journey whenever they feel like they are ready, instead of the fear that can come with it. Because I know you talked about the sort of feeling the fear of transitioning into that as well, and what that was like for you.
Well, and I think I was very fortunate because, so I'm divorced, but I have an amazing relationship with my ex-husband, and he's a producer as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're both very committed to our son, and we're also very committed to supporting each other in our careers. And, there have been periods where he's had movies and he's had to leave for long periods of time, or there were periods on The Substance where he just said go, and I've got it, and Theo's going to be great, and I'm going to take care of him. And, we made it work in that way. And so I feel very fortunate that I had a supportive ex-partner, I guess, co-parent.
Partner, still a partner,
But I feel like that has really also, helped me be able to do that because, I couldn't imagine having to do it, as a single mom, for instance.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be really hard.
Mad hats off to any woman who does it as a single
hard.
Parent, because I have a tribe and it's still hard,
Yeah.
So I can't imagine to have so much respect, newfound respect for every woman. Every now and when I just in the world now, I look at every human and I'm like, some women birthed you, and that's why you're here. This is crazy.
There is such a financial consideration to bringing a child to set. I never considered bringing my son to France for the entire shoot because there would have been the cost of a nanny being there, of a bigger, place for me to stay, of, all of that stuff. There is a budgetary consideration. So I know there are directors who bring their children and they're in a position to ask for that. And financially, if the movie can handle it, that's great. But with most movies, you're trying to find ways to cut the budget. And, it's hard to kind of make the argument that I also need more money so that I can bring my child here.
Yeah.
That's very tricky. It's very hard.
I know. I hope we can somehow normalize it, though. And I don't know, somehow we can find a way that we can support working parents in our industry, because it's just it's different. You can't just drop your kid off at daycare. It's just different. The hours are different. All the things are different. So I hope we can get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just to wrap up before we go into the lightning round, because I maybe interrupted you, but you said it changed your life, and I'm just curious, like, if you could distill that into in what way it changed your life.
I think it was really working with Coralie. Like, she's a filmmaker who is so passionate and so willing to fight for what she believes in a way that I had never quite seen before. And it definitely taught me a lot. You know, the film was really hard to get made. Like, as I said to you before, we were met with a lot of no's, and Universal made the film but didn't end up distributing it. You know, we got into Cannes, which really changed the trajectory of the film, but it was just something that was met with a lot of no's, honestly, the whole way along. And I just really watched Coralie like have this amazing belief in herself, and I saw how it paid off, and I feel like I truly like took so much away from that.
Yeah.
I also just learned a lot from how she worked as a filmmaker. And you know, we talked about this a little bit before, but she's a full producer, capital P, on the movie, and she like truly is a full producer on the movie. I mean, she knew like every single cent that was spent on the movie. She paid attention to absolutely everything. And yeah, I just feel like it was a learning experience that I took so much away from, truly.
Yeah, I love that. So the first question is, what's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
So it's Spotify Wrapped time.
Yeah.
And every year there's like the same song that's in my top 5.
Yeah.
And it's a song by Christine and the Queens. The title's in French. I won't say it. Well, I can say it. Je disparais dans tes bras. But it's a song that I just love. Like, I blast it in my car. I just love it. And that's kind of the song I go to. My son, by the way, is like, you always play that song. I don't know why. I love it. It makes me happy. It like relaxes me.
He's going to grow up with a very specific attachment to that song. I love it. What is the latest piece of art that has moved you? A book, a film, anything?
Probably 2 films, The Brutalist and A Different Man. I just loved both of those movies so much. With The Brutalist, like, I just was so moved by how ambitious it was. Like, I just wanted to cry from the opening scene. It was really incredible. And A Different Man was like the most unexpected, joyful, original, just incredible movie. I loved it so much.
Yeah, amazing. Fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
The ocean.
What is one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made, and it doesn't have to be financial?
Therapy.
And lastly, what's one failure that you wouldn't be here without?
I think very early in my career, I had a boss who was very unkind to me, always belittling me, asking what I was doing all day with all those scripts in my office. And I feel like at the time I didn't know how to stand up for myself or how to advocate for myself. I was also very young, so I can go easy on myself, but that definitely was something I would handle totally differently now.
Being treated like that, how did it shift things for you to help empower you to like find yourself now as a producer?
I would say, you know, at the time I felt like he had all the power. He was my boss, that he was going to control the trajectory of my career. You know, that me getting another job was going to be dependent on his recommendation. And then in the end, of course, that was absolutely not the case. And, you know, it's this notion that like no one person holds your future in their hands. You hold your own future in your hands. And I definitely didn't understand that in that moment. But, you know, it proved to be true, and it felt really great to walk into his office and quit.
And look at you now.
And look at me now.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us.
Me.
Of course.